Yeah, and Rand Paul's an interesting guy. I probably disagree with this guy on most things, but when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to the anti-war stuff, he's right on the money. He's right on the money. Like, again, I don't care if whatever his label is or party, I really don't care. I care about what's coming out of his mouth, right? And how he votes.
My oath of office is to the U.S. Constitution, not to any foreign nation. And no matter how sympathetic the cause, my oath of office is to the national security of the United States of America. We cannot save Ukraine by dooming the U.S. economy. This bill under consideration would spend $40 billion. This is the second spending bill for Ukraine in 2 months, and this bill is 3 times larger than the first. Our military aid to Ukraine is nothing new, though. Since 2014, the United States has provided more than $6 billion in security assistance to Ukraine, in addition to the $14 billion Congress authorized just a month ago. If this bill passes, the U.S. will have authorized roughly $60 billion in total spending for Ukraine. Let's put $60 billion into perspective. According to Elias Youssef, a security assistant at the Stimson Center, Kiev would become the largest yearly recipient of U.S. military aid of the past 2 decades. Except for the top 5 countries, $60 billion is more than every other country in the world spends on their entire military expenditures. If this gift to Ukraine passes, our total...
Senator. Right. So, sorry, just to stop him right there. That's a very important point because, you know, Germany, for example, one thing that NATO have wanted them to do for a long time is increase their, how much of their GDP they spend on the military, right? So it was about 1.5%, and they wanted it to be 2%. Germany has done that now as a result of the pressure and the war in Ukraine, and they've committed 100 billion euros to the military. Okay, so again, just to put that in perspective, he's saying that, you know, the way this is going, Ukraine has received and will receive more money in weapons than some countries spend on their entire defense budget. Can you imagine that? Pretty sure that's the size of the Russian military budget. And if not, it will certainly surpass it soon.
The world spends on their entire military expenditures. If this gift to Ukraine passes, our total aid to Ukraine will almost equal the entire military budget of Russia.
Oh, yeah,
and it's
there we
not
go.
as if we have that money lying around. We will have to borrow that money from China to send it to Ukraine. The cost of this package we are voting on today is more than the U.S. spent during the first year of the U.S. conflict in Afghanistan. Congress authorized force, and the president sent troops into the conflict. The same cannot be said of Ukraine. This proposal towers over domestic priorities as well.
Right, so I don't know if you caught what he was saying. We were talking about this last time, how, you know, the War Powers Resolution makes sure that the president, this is, again, theoretical, doesn't exist in practice, but the War Powers Resolution stipulates that the president cannot just go and start wars without congressional approval. And we'll get to that in a second, but that's what he was saying right now. Yeah, so like we're giving all of this money, and yet Congress hasn't even authorized military force. What's going on?
Massive package of $60 billion to Ukraine dwarfs the $6 million spent on cancer research annually. $60 billion is more than the amount the government collects in gas taxes each year to build roads and bridges. The $60 billion to Ukraine could fund substantial portions or entire large cabinet departments. The $60 billion nearly equals the entire State Department budget. The $60 billion exceeds the budget for the Department of Homeland Security and for the Department of Energy.
He makes a very compelling point, and he's being now basically not called a Putin puppet just yet. Okay, so this is a former NATO commander talking about Rand Paul.
But he's once again holding up what feel like extremely urgent tranches of aid to Ukraine. He's holding up this $40 billion aid bill. It's going to pass, but he's demanding, you know, alterations to the legislation. He wants an inspector general to oversee spending, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. How big of a problem is that?
Etc. Blah, blah, blah. Like, why would you need somebody to make sure this money is going to the right people? This is blah, blah, blah. Come on, this is stupid. Let's just send the money. She's funny, isn't she?
That you have this senator doing that, especially now.
It really is so counterproductive in the cause of democracy and freedom. And as you know well, Joy, you're an expert on Washington politics. This is the rare issue where there really is agreement across the spectrum politically, from Kevin McCarthy to Nancy Pelosi, from Mitch McConnell to Chuck Schumer. Everybody gets it on you.
Yeah, exactly. I love it when they say the quiet part out loud. Do you see? He's telling you everybody in Washington loves war and they love giving money to the arms dealers. He just said it to you. He said it in another way, but that's what he's telling you. Huh? You understand the game?
Evidently, except Senator Rand Paul. He needs to be taken into the cloakroom by some of his fellow Republican senators. I nominate Lindsey Graham for that duty. Lindsey Graham is a retired military officer. He gets the courage and the perseverance of the Ukrainians.
Wow.
He had to take his colleague aside and say, look, this is not one to play politics with. No one else is doing so.
It's really unbelievable. Let's talk just a moment about one of the other unfortunate sort of side effects of this war that Russia is waging.
He needs to be taken into the cloakroom. I thought he was going to say he needs to be taken out with a drone. I wouldn't be surprised, right? This is not the time to be playing politics. I find that very weird because it's war. I mean, how is it not politics? It's war. And it's not me saying that. It's the Americans themselves. Take a look.
I wish we'd get off this and really focus on the enemy. I know there's a lot of politics here, but we're at war.
Wow.
We need to produce energy. As
We're
I
at
told
war.
you in Code Point.
Once again, that's a hell of a statement. We are at war. I mean, when he says we, he means the Americans, right? And by extension, Europe and NATO. We are at war. I thought it's Ukraine and Russia that are at war. You see, the American officials, whether it's Austin or Biden, they're starting to say the quiet part out loud. They're starting to become very careless, right? And bragging even. And usually, again, when you're in a proxy war, which this is a proxy war, you don't want to show your involvement. The whole idea is that you get someone else to do the dirty work so you don't reveal your hand. And they are saying we are at war. Did Congress approve that? Again, I ask this question because they always talk about checks and balances, right? Like that's the beauty of the democracy in the U.S. You have checks and balances, and you know there's separation of the judiciary and the executive and the legislature, and you know the government functions properly, and there's always somebody to hold somebody accountable, so the power isn't concentrated into one hand and things go wild. I just want to be clear, even if the U.S. Congress decides something, that doesn't mean it's legal internationally. You should always keep that in mind, because some people think that U.S. law is universal law. No, it's not. And again, I just want to go back to this clip here. Like, do you see how she brings on the former NATO commander? I'm not against that. Like, that's fine. You know, open invitation on the show. You're very welcome to come on as well for a nice little grilling. But the thing is, they say that, well, you know, the U.S. doesn't have state media and it's a free press and all these things. But yet the only people you see on MSNBC and CNN and all these mainstream channels are people like this, you know, people who work for the, I don't know if I should say work or worked for the CIA or the FBI or, you know, NATO. They always bring on state officials. Always. You don't see that in the countries where they claim they're state media. It's quite frankly the opposite, which that's a very interesting observation, right? You won't turn on TV in whatever evil country they're talking about and see something like that, or at least not to this extent, but just a tiny observation. Now, Jem Psaki, the White House spokesperson, she was asked about this statement about whether the U.S. is at war. Let's look at what she had to say.
On the House floor earlier today, the Democratic Majority Leader, Steny Hoyer, said, quote, "It is unfortunate that in a time of war that we spend all the time blaming our own president." Just a clarification, it's not the White House's belief that we're at war or we're engaged in any kind of conflict?
I think I did not see the full context of his comments. What I'm betting he was referring to was the war happening in Ukraine with Russia that obviously the U.S. has a stake in, given the amount of military, humanitarian, economic assistance we've provided. And as I've said before, of course, the Ukrainians deserve the greatest accolades for their bravery and their courage, but the American people also deserve a lot of gratitude for their sacrifices and their support of this war.
You can make up your own mind about her statement. I'm seeing something interesting here. I'm seeing a trend that's a bit weird, but it's there nevertheless. What I'm seeing are very, very few, just a few anti-war voices regarding Ukraine. And what's weird to me is that we've been told that people like AOC, and like, don't get me wrong, when they were new, the squad, like, everybody gave them the benefit of the doubt because they looked very serious about supporting Palestine, about being against the military, the war machine and all this stuff. And today, they vote in favor of giving $20 billion to the military-industrial complex. And the only ones that are actually voting against it are Republicans, which is very weird, right? Especially for me, if you're my age and you remember the war on terror, and you're, I mean, yeah, it's kind of funny, right? But again, it's splitting hairs sometimes. You know, all the neoconservatives are in the Democratic Party now. It's one big club. Like, let's not lose sight of that. It's one big club. But nevertheless, the only people that are saying things like Rand Paul and so on appear to be Republicans. Here's another one of those clips which I came across. Tell me what you think.
Madam Speaker, I rise to warn of a dangerous bipartisan consensus that is walking us into war with Russia. In the days following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, Senator Rob Portman said, "I haven't seen this kind of unity since 9/11. It's a nice statement, but what does it really mean? Unity always seems to come before the worst decisions we make. Our drive to unity often overruns our reason and discernment. The post-9/11 consensus gave us the Iraq War, the Patriot Act. The COVID lockdowns and mandates came from unity bundled by fear. Defund the police took off because dissent wasn't allowed. You were shouted down as a racist, just as now questioning our actions in Ukraine makes you a traitor. Do we have amnesia in this House? Is memory loss a consequence of the gerontocracy of Congress? Just a year ago, we lost a war against goat herders waving rifles. Now we're rushing to fight a nation that possesses 6,000 nuclear warheads? Representatives now recklessly assert that we are at war. Congressman Moulton said last week, quote, "We're not just at war to support the Ukrainians, we're fundamentally at war, although somewhat through a proxy, with Russia." The clandestine services are supposed to be the quiet professionals. Seems now they can't stop bragging to news outlets about how America helped Ukraine assassinate Russian generals and sink Russia's flagship. How exactly is this supposed to end? It's as if the administration is probing Putin's nuclear red line. A game of chicken between nuclear powers is insane, and this from Joe Biden, who campaigned to be America's calming sedative.
Right, so you see the issue is that he's speaking some sense, but of course gotta throw in the casual racism, right? Goat herders. What does that even mean? You just said they kicked your ass, so I wouldn't start getting too arrogant, but. You see what I'm saying? Like, the only ones that are actually saying, hey, this might lead to a nuclear war, this is bad, this is confrontational, this is escalatory. The officials from the intelligence agencies, that's who he was talking about, are bragging to the media. Again, these are the same things that I was telling you about, which, I mean, you never even saw this in the Cold War. It's coming from the Republicans. Although, again, to be fair, I don't see any difference between the two. They are both the war party, and we know this because all of these wars and programs, and they're started by Republicans, right? So there's no difference at the end of the day. Like, it's splitting hairs. It's really splitting hairs. But right now, today, in May 2022, you can see who voted against sending the military-industrial complex and the CIA tens of billions of dollars, and who raised these concerns and who didn't, right? So I'm reporting to you the news. This is a fact. These videos are real. These statements were made, and that's where we are at.